On the eve of the Formula One Dutch Grand Prix, the two Ferrari drivers did not hide that the Zandvoort race could prove difficult for the SF-24 cars. Indeed, the first day back after the summer break turned out to be a rude awakening, with Charles Leclerc only ninth at the end of the qualifying simulations, 3/4 of a second off the pace set by George Russell, and also lagging on long runs, although he encountered a bit of traffic at times. Carlos Sainz's day was far more complicated, as he was forced to stop after a few laps in the second free practice session due to a technical issue with the gearbox. Difficulties that, however, were somehow expected, not only because the trend seen in recent races was that of a Ferrari struggling more compared to McLaren and Red Bull, but also because the 4.259-kilometer Circuit Zandvoort is not the best suited to showcase the qualities of the SF-24 single-seater. A déjà vu? Also because 12 months ago, Zandvoort was precisely the race where the revival of the Scuderia began. Although the weekend turned out to be disappointing in terms of overall performance, partly due to similar reasons to those currently affecting this year's car, the Maranello engineers conducted some tests that later proved useful during development. The nature of the very long, high downforce corners, with medium high-speed sections where support and stability are needed, especially where great precision is required while braking during the rotation phase, has once again highlighted the limits of the Maranello project as they await more updates, which are expected for the upcoming races, starting with the Italian Grand Prix at the Monza circuit. Charles Leclerc's words clearly explain a complex situation for a weekend that even team principal Vasseur has essentially described as a defensive one, in an attempt to maximize the result. But it is clear that it will take much more than one of the Monegasque's magic tricks to try to turn the situation around. Charles Leclerc indicated that he would try to do something special in qualifying, but acknowledged that they were currently too far behind to achieve anything significant. He added that if they managed to close the gap to within 2 or 3 tenths, there might be something they could do. Otherwise, he anticipated a difficult weekend at the Zandvoort circuit. Looking at the data, there are 2 critical areas that truly put Ferrari in crisis, which are most evident in the second sector. In turn 7, it's noticeable how Charles Leclerc is one of the few drivers to use the brakes, resulting in a lower speed through the corner. The impression is that the Monegasque driver tends to sacrifice the entry to have a more manageable and controllable car at the center of the corner, then tries to minimize the gap on the exit with his classic style of modulating the throttle, which is less pronounced than that of his rivals. This pattern repeats in turn 8 and, consequently, in the approach to braking for turn 9, one of the most complex on the entire track. As previously seen, the Monegasque driver is unable to carry much speed into the corner to avoid struggling excessively in the middle of it. Here, the lack of aerodynamic downforce of the SF-24 becomes apparent, which, in any case, had already shown more issues in fast and very long corners compared to McLaren and Red Bull. Additionally, there's difficulty in the combined phase, which refers to those sections where the driver needs to start braking with the steering wheel already engaged in the rotation phase to set up the corner. The most obvious example is the braking for turn 9, where the Ferrari cannot be as sharp, needing to start decelerating earlier to avoid arriving too on the edge at the center of the corner, risking understeer. For a driver like Charles Leclerc, who has often made braking efficiency one of his strengths, this limitation of the SF-24 car has a double impact. On one hand, it prevents him from exploiting one of his best skills, and on the other, it forces him to play with the throttle to try to cover up the weaknesses. However, at Zandvoort, these 2 elements combine in an even more visible way, highlighting the weaknesses of the Maranello project. The goal for the night is to work on the setup to try to reduce the gap seen in practice, while also keeping an eye on the weather, which could bring some surprises. As well as both Mercedes and McLaren cars, Max Verstappen's Red Bull, Fernando Alonso's Aston Martin, RB's Yuki Tsunoda, and Haas's Kevin Magnussen finished ahead of the Monegasque in a more representative FP2 session at the Zandvoort circuit, as Charles Leclerc was left to assess where Ferrari are lacking. It comes as the Maranello team try to recover from mid-season developments that brought back the unwanted side effect of bouncing, and have forced the Scuderia to carry out tests and apply interim solutions for several races. Charles Leclerc described his day at the wheel as tough, stating that it was as expected. He acknowledged that they didn't quite have the pace of the frontrunners, unfortunately. While the Monegasque believed the situation was better than it appeared on the timesheet, he admitted they were still not in contention for the race victory this weekend. The Ferrari driver mentioned that there was still quite a bit of work to do and expressed hope that their efforts would pay off soon. Charles Leclerc was then asked if the potential for further rain on Saturday and during qualifying could present himself and Ferrari with an opportunity to bridge the gap, to which he confirmed that is indeed the target. The Monegasque said he would try to do something special in qualifying, but acknowledged that the gaps they were currently dealing with were likely too large to achieve anything significant. His teammate, Carlos Sainz, displayed a fairly encouraging performance in the opening 60-minute practice, but he spent the majority of the second practice in the garage. The Spaniard kicked off FP2 on Pirelli's medium tires, but just after 7 laps, he was forced to pit after a suspected gearbox issue, which the team was unable to solve during the session. Carlos Sainz mentioned that the day had not been easy and explained that bad weather in the morning prevented them from running properly, while during the second free practice session, a gearbox problem in the first run limited the number of laps he could complete. The Spaniard expressed that they would try to make up for the lost time and build confidence around the track the next day, acknowledging that they had work to do to close the gap to the top. The Dutch weekend still has a lot to reveal, especially given the expected conditions, but the first impressions from the opening day of practice have been quite clear. So far, McLaren has not shown any issues with its new aerodynamic update package. On the contrary, it seems to have raised the stakes both in terms of the level of downforce available to the car and the setup options. The impression, based on the data, is that the Woking team has prepared a setup designed to perfect tire management, an aspect that will certainly be very delicate in the race, and Lando Norris's long run was truly remarkable. The data indicated that the updated MCL38 exhibits a high level of downforce, with all indicators in its favor, but is not the most performant car in the very high-speed sections, especially in Turn 7, a section that drivers will likely try to take flat out in qualifying. The impression is that the choice of high downforce is also combined with a certain suspension softness, particularly in roll, to better handle curbs, bumps, and slow corners, as well as to improve tire management. We will have to see how Lando Norris's and Oscar Piastri's cars evolve in the qualifying session later today, with great curiosity to assign a concrete value to the aerodynamic update package brought to the Dutch track. Behind the McLaren cars, Mercedes would probably rank next, perhaps even ahead of Max Verstappen's Red Bull RB20 in terms of on-track performance based on the data from the first 2 free practice sessions at the Zandvoort circuit. On a single lap run, the speed of the updated Mercedes W15 cars of George Russell and Lewis Hamilton, bolstered by very favorable conditions with both air and track surface temperatures being very low, appeared significant.